High Admiral Zikthara stood before the massive holographic display that dominated the command center of the hegemony's primary strategic facility. The three-dimensional map showed the entire spiral arm of the galaxy, with territorial boundaries marked in different colors. The crimson glow of hegemony space spread across thousands of star systems like a vast infection, consuming world after world in its relentless expansion. For 3 centuries, their empire had grown without pause, conquering system after system with methodical, mechanical precision. The hegemony war machine was a thing of terrible beauty, efficient, ruthless, and unstoppable. They had crushed the proud warrior cultures of the Zethari clans, absorbed the technological marvels of the synthetic collective, and reduced the ancient philosopher kings to chattel slaves in their own palaces. Yet as Zikthara's 4 eyes scanned the territorial map, one anomaly continued to vex her strategic mind. There, nestled in what should have been prime expansion territory, remained a small gap. A single yellow star system that stood unconquered, unmarked, and apparently ignored by every major power in the galaxy. "Commander Vector," she called to her chief intelligence officer, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally ordered the destruction of entire civilizations. "Explain to me again why this sole system remains unconquered by anyone." The insectoid officer approached with characteristic nervous energy, his 6 legs clicking against the polished floor. His antennae twitched as he consulted his datapad, a gesture Zikthara had learned to recognize as extreme discomfort. "High Admiral, our historical records indicate that 17 different empires have approached that system over the past millennium," Vector reported, his compound eyes refusing to meet her gaze. "The Keth Dominion, the Zarketh Empire, the Moltar Hegemony, even the recent Stellar Confederation, none have attempted conquest. And what reasons do they give for this? Oversight? The official reports consistently cite strategic insignificance or inadequate resource potential," Vector said, but his antennae betrayed his nervousness with rapid oscillations. However, the unofficial communications we've intercepted paint a different picture entirely. The veteran commanders speak of that system in hushed tones, High Admiral. They mention the third planet's inhabitants, humans, with what can only be described as fear. Zikthara's mandibles clicked in genuine amusement, a sound like breaking glass that echoed through the command center. Her subordinates knew that sound well. It usually preceded the complete annihilation of whoever had earned her attention. Fear of a single planet species that hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel? She gestured dismissively with one of her 4 arms. 17 empires, each commanding thousands of warships, each capable of glassing planets from orbit, and they're all afraid of primitive mammals who still use chemical rockets? High Admiral, perhaps we should conduct a more thorough investigation before— "Commander," Zikthara's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Vector's entire body went rigid. "No, High Admiral, of course not." "Excellent. Prepare the 47th Conquest Fleet. 500 ships should be more than adequate to deal with whatever primitive defenses these humans have managed to construct. We'll show the galaxy how the hegemony deals with backward worlds." As Vector scurried away to carry out her orders, Zikthara returned her attention to the holographic display. The innocent yellow star pulsed gently in the 3-dimensional space, surrounded by the territorial markers of empires that had somehow found reasons to avoid it. Soon, very soon, it would bear the crimson mark of hegemony conquest. How difficult could one primitive planet possibly be? 3 weeks later, the void at the edge of the Sol system rippled like disturbed water as 500 hegemony warships tore through the fabric of hyperspace. The 47th Conquest Fleet materialized in perfect geometric formation, their crystalline hulls catching and refracting the distant light of Sol into prismatic displays of imperial power. Each vessel was a masterwork of destruction, sleek predators designed for one purpose: the complete subjugation of primitive worlds. High Admiral Zikthara stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Inevitable Dominion, watching the tactical displays populate with data. The familiar thrill of conquest coursed through her veins. Soon, another world would kneel before the hegemony's might. "Full system scan initiated, High Admiral," reported her sensor operator, a young officer whose cybernetic implants interfaced directly with the ship's detection arrays. "Confirming stellar classification G2V, 9 planetary bodies, numerous artificial structures throughout the system, and this is curious." "Define curious, Lieutenant." "The third planet, designated Earth in their local nomenclature, shows clear signs of a Type 0.7 civilization. Primitive nuclear fission technology, basic chemical propulsion for space travel, scattered orbital installations." The lieutenant's synthetic eye whirred as it processed incoming data streams. "But, High Admiral, their detection capabilities are unexpected." "Meaning?" "They've found us, ma'am. Despite our stealth field generators operating at full capacity, despite maintaining position at maximum sensor range, they know we're here." Zikthara's mandibles clicked in irritation. The hegemony's cloaking technology had rendered them invisible to every species they'd encountered. The idea that primitive mammals could penetrate their defenses was not just impossible, it was insulting. "Verify your readings, Lieutenant. Our stealth systems are—" "Incoming transmission, High Admiral," the communications officer interrupted. "Origin point, Earth. They're broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies." "Impossible," Zikthara breathed, but even as she spoke, the main view screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was distinctly alien to her experience. Soft features, only 2 eyes, pale pink skin marked by the passage of time. Male, she determined from the biological markers, middle-aged by the standards of most carbon-based species. But it was the eyes that gave her pause. They were tired. Not physically exhausted, but carrying a weariness that seemed to extend far beyond this creature's brief lifespan. "This is Admiral Jonathan Hayes of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of resignation and authority. "You have entered our system without invitation or permission. I am required by interstellar protocols to request that you state your intentions." The bridge fell completely silent. In 3 centuries of expansion, in the conquest of 2,000 worlds, no primitive species had ever detected their approach. None had ever possessed the technology to pierce their stealth barriers. And certainly none had ever had the unmitigated audacity to address a hegemony High Admiral as if they were equals. Zikthara activated her universal translator, her voice dripping with the condescension of absolute power. "I am High Admiral Zikthara of the Galactic Hegemony. Your pathetic world is now claimed as territory of our empire. You will surrender immediately and unconditionally. Comply, and your deaths will be swift." She expected terror, pleading, perhaps desperate threats or offers of tribute. Instead, the human's expression shifted to something that looked remarkably like disappointment. "I see," Hayes said quietly. "Another empire that doesn't know." He sighed deeply, the sound carrying across the transmission with startling clarity. "High Admiral, I'm going to give you exactly 1 opportunity to turn your fleet around and leave our system. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is me offering you the chance to avoid a mistake that 17 other empires have learned to regret." Every being on the bridge froze. In the entire recorded history of the hegemony, no one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to a High Admiral with such casual dismissal. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. "You Zikthara began, her voice rising to a shriek. "Not a threat, Admiral," Hayes interrupted calmly. "A warning. We've had this exact conversation 17 times before. You won't be the 18th to make the same mistake." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the inevitable Dominion in stunned, horrified silence. High Admiral, Commander Vektar approached with measured steps, his antenna betraying his nervous energy despite his attempt at professional composure. "Our deep-range sensors are detecting anomalous patterns throughout the system." "Elaborate," Zikthara commanded, her attention focused on the tactical hologram that displayed Earth's orbital infrastructure in three-dimensional detail. "The humans appear to be conducting normal operations. No military mobilization, no defensive fleet movements, no emergency broadcasts to their installations." His compound eyes reflected confusion as he consulted multiple data streams. "Commercial vessels continue their established routes between planets. Space stations maintain standard operational parameters, and the planet itself shows no deviation from baseline energy signatures." Zikthara studied the tactical display with growing irritation. It was true. Earth's behavior defied every military protocol she understood. Mining ships continued extracting resources from asteroid belts. Research stations broadcast routine scientific data, and civilian traffic flowed through shipping lanes as if 500 alien warships weren't positioned at their system's edge. Arrogance, she decided, her mandibles clicking with predatory satisfaction. These primitives believe their previous encounters make them invincible. They think their reputation will protect them from actual consequences. She turned to her tactical coordinator. "Commander Hikesnall, select your finest squadron and disable one of their outer installations. Something non-essential to avoid triggering system-wide panic. Let's demonstrate what happens when inferior species mistake our patience for weakness." 24 of the hegemony's most advanced destroyers broke from the main formation, their sleek hulls cutting through space with lethal grace. Commander Hikesnall led them toward a sprawling industrial complex orbiting a large asteroid designated Ceres in the human navigation charts. "Approaching target now, High Admiral," Hikesnall reported, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had led similar operations against dozens of worlds. "Preliminary scans indicate primitive construction, basic metal alloys, polymer composites, fusion welding techniques at best. No visible weapon systems, no energy shields, no defensive installations whatsoever." The human station was indeed crude by hegemony standards, a collection of interconnected modules clinging to the asteroid's surface like some parasitic growth. Docking bays, processing facilities, and habitat modules connected by exposed corridors that spoke of hasty construction and limited resources. "Deploying boarding pods," Hikesnall continued. "Resistance should be minimal." The assault proceeded exactly as expected. Hegemony shock troops breached multiple hull sections simultaneously, encountering confused miners and technicians who offered no meaningful resistance. Within 8 minutes, Ceros Base was completely under their control, its human occupants secured and the facility's primitive computers accessed. "Target secured, High Admiral," Hikesnall transmitted, triumph evident in his voice. "These humans are pathetically soft, slow reflexes, minimal physical strength, no combat training to speak of. They surrendered the moment they saw our soldiers. I'm beginning to understand why our predecessors avoided this system. It's simply not worth the effort to conquer such a—" His transmission dissolved into electronic static. "Commander Hikesnall, report immediately." Zikthara's voice cracked across the communication channels. Nothing but silence answered her. On the tactical display, 24 destroyer signatures, representing thousands of tons of military hardware and hundreds of trained personnel, simply vanished. Not destroyed in combat, not exploded by hidden weapons, not even damaged by defensive systems. They were simply gone, erased from reality as if they had never existed at all. Saros Base continued its mining operations without interruption, automated systems grinding asteroid ore into refined materials exactly as they had before the attack. The human workers who had been captured were back at their posts, operating machinery with casual efficiency. "How?" whispered the sensor operator, his cybernetic implants frantically cycling through detection protocols. There were no weapon signatures, no energy discharges, no defensive systems of any kind. How did they eliminate an entire squadron without firing a single shot? Zikthara stared at the impossible display, feeling something she had not experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: genuine fear. "Get me that human admiral again," she ordered, her voice barely controlled. "Now." Admiral Hayes materialized on the main view screen once again, but this time he was not alone. Behind him stood a collection of humans, men and women of varying ages, all wearing the same expression of weary resignation that seemed to define their species' interaction with the galaxy. Their clothing was simple, functional, bearing no military insignia or obvious weapons, yet something about their collective presence radiated a quiet, terrible authority. "You lost a squadron," Hayes stated without preamble. It wasn't a question. The certainty in his voice suggested he knew exactly what had transpired at Ceres Base. "What did you do to my ships?" Zikthara demanded, her forearms gesticulating wildly as her composure finally cracked. "Where are my people? What kind of weapon did you use?" "Nothing. We don't need to use weapons against your ships, Admiral," Hayes replied with the patience of someone who had explained this concept many times before. He gestured to the individuals behind him with careful deliberation. "Allow me to introduce my colleagues. Dr. Sarah Chen, our leading theoretical physicist. Dr. Marcus Webb, senior xenobiologist. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of quantum engineering. Behind them stand approximately 40,000 other specialists that you cannot see through this transmission. Mathematicians, engineers, philosophers, and scientists representing the collective intellectual achievement of our entire species." "Scientists?" Zikthara's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and growing hysteria. "You think your primitive researchers can stand against the combined military might of the hegemony? Our weapons can crack planets. Our fleets have conquered star systems." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression mild but her eyes sharp with intelligence that seemed to cut through the transmission itself. "Admiral Zikthara, tell me, in your vast experience of galactic conquest, what single characteristic do you believe defines the most dangerous species in the universe?" "Power," Zikthara answered immediately. "Superior firepower, advanced technology, overwhelming military superiority." "Intelligence," Chen replied simply, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of absolute certainty. "Not raw computational ability. We know many species exceed us in pure processing power, but the specific type of intelligence that examines an impossible problem and discovers solutions that others never even considered attempting." "Your ships didn't attack our mining station," Dr. Webb continued, his tone conversational despite the magnitude of what he was describing. "They approached it, boarded it, occupied it. All perfectly standard military doctrine, exactly what any competent Space Force would do when encountering a defenseless target." Dr. Vasquez smiled, but the expression carried no warmth whatsoever. What wasn't standard, what couldn't have been anticipated by any conventional military thinking, was that they attempted these actions within human space, space that has been fundamentally altered at the quantum level. "Modified how?" Zikthara asked, though every instinct screamed that she didn't want to hear the answer. "Have you ever encountered quantum entanglement in your studies, Admiral?" Hayes asked with deadly calm. "Of course you have. Most spacefaring civilizations discover the phenomenon eventually. Paired particles that remain connected regardless of distance, changes in one instantly affecting the other. A curiosity, perhaps useful for communication systems." The display behind the humans shifted dramatically, revealing a three-dimensional representation of the Sol system unlike anything Zikthera had ever seen. Instead of empty space punctuated by planets and asteroids, the entire system appeared to be connected by an intricate web of light. Quantum threads linking every celestial body, every artificial structure, every particle of matter in an impossibly complex network. But we didn't just discover quantum entanglement, Chen explained with scientific precision. We weaponized it. We spent 300 years and nearly bankrupted our entire civilization to accomplish something that every expert said was theoretically impossible. Every atom in our solar system, Webb continued, every molecule, every particle of matter from the edge of our heliopause to the surface of our sun has been quantum entangled with every other atom in our space. The Sol system isn't just our home anymore, Vasquez added with quiet pride. It's our weapon, our fortress, our extended body. Your ships entered our space, Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. The moment they crossed our boundary, they became part of our quantum matrix. And once something becomes entangled with our system, we control it completely, the three scientists said in unison. Zikthera felt her legs give way as the impossible implications crashed over her consciousness like a tidal wave of terror. "You want to understand why no one attacks Earth, Admiral?" Hayes asked, settling into his chair with the deliberate movements of someone carrying an enormous burden. "Let me tell you a story that begins 800 years ago, when Earth received its first visitors from the stars." The display behind him shifted dramatically, showing historical footage that had been preserved in humanity's archives. Tall, graceful beings with elongated limbs and faces of ethereal beauty stood beside human diplomats in what appeared to be a grand ceremonial hall. Their clothing shimmered with technologies beyond human comprehension, and their movements carried the fluid grace of a species that had transcended the crude limitations of primitive biology. "The Keth Dominion," Hayes continued, his voice carrying the weight of ancient grief. "They were everything we aspired to become: peaceful, advanced, enlightened, masters of science and philosophy who had guided dozens of species into what they called galactic civilization. They offered to be our mentors, our guides into a larger universe filled with wonders we could barely imagine." The footage showed human leaders shaking hands, or what passed for hands, with the Keth representatives. Crowds of humans gathered in celebration, children holding signs welcoming their new alien friends, scientists eagerly exchanging data with beings whose knowledge spanned millennia. "The Keth presented themselves as benevolent shepherds," Dr. Chen interjected, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They spoke of cultural exchange, technological advancement, spiritual growth. All we had to do was accept their guidance, follow their recommendations, and trust in their wisdom. What we discovered," Hayes said grimly, "was that the Keth didn't guide species into civilization, they harvested them. Every culture they helped eventually became absorbed into their collective, their unique qualities stripped away and integrated into Keth society. The warrior peoples became their military caste. The artistic races became their entertainment. The technical civilizations became their labor force." The display showed darker images now. Keth facilities where beings of various species worked in apparent contentment, their eyes vacant, their movements mechanical. Children separated from families, adults undergoing strange procedures that left them docile and compliant. "We had the galaxy's worst luck," Dr. Webb added with bitter irony. "We became the first species in the Keth Dominion's 1,000-year history to discover their true nature before the integration process was complete. And worse, we said no. The Keth didn't handle rejection well," Hayes said, his expression growing darker. "6 months after our refusal, their armada arrived. 3,000 ships, orbital bombardment platforms, planet killers designed to sterilize worlds from space. They intended to make an example of us,
a demonstration to the galaxy of what happened to species that refused their benevolence. The footage now showed Earth skies filled with alien vessels, cities burning under streams of energy that fell like rain from above, millions of humans fleeing underground, children crying in subway tunnels converted to bomb shelters, civilization crumbling under an assault that lasted for decades. We couldn't fight them conventionally, Hayes continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Their technology was centuries ahead of ours. Our most advanced weapons were barely capable of scratching their hulls. So we did what humans have always done when conventional solutions fail. We got desperate enough to try the impossible. The quantum entanglement project began as a last resort, Dr. Vasquez explained, her eyes reflecting the memory of her predecessor's sacrifice. A desperate attempt to hide our most important people and resources in parallel dimensions. But as the project developed, our scientists realized we could do more than hide. We could fight back using the laws of physics themselves. It took 50 years, Chen said quietly. 50 years of living like moles, of watching our surface cities burn, of losing millions of people to bombardments that never seemed to end. Entire generations were born and died in underground shelters, never seeing sunlight, never knowing peace. But we persevered, Hayes said, his voice gaining strength. And when the quantum matrix was finally complete, when every atom in our solar system had been entangled with every other atom, the display showed the moment of victory. 3,000 Keth ships simply vanishing from Earth's skies in an instant, disappearing without explosion or debris, as if they had never existed at all. The remaining Keth forces retreated to their borders that day, Hayes concluded. They sent one message to the galactic community before sealing themselves away forever. A single word: don't.
The bridge of the hegemony flagship, Inevitable Dominion, had fallen into a silence so complete that the subtle hum of life support systems seemed deafening. Zythara stared at the human faces on her view screen, her 4 eyes struggling to process the magnitude of what she had learned. An entire solar system transformed into a weapon of incomprehensible power. Quantum manipulation on a scale that redefined the very concept of warfare. And behind it all, a species that had spent 8 centuries preparing for exactly this moment, her moment of decision. "You could have destroyed us the instant we entered your system," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission felt like swallowing molten metal. Hayes nodded with the gravity of someone who had made this same acknowledgement 17 times before. "Yes, Admiral. Every ship in your fleet could have been erased from existence before your sensors even detected our planets. Then why didn't you?" The question escaped her mandibles before she could stop it, carrying a vulnerability that no hegemony officer should ever display. "Because destruction is permanent, Admiral," Hayes replied, his weathered features softening slightly. "What we demonstrated with your squadron, the quantum displacement, is completely reversible. Your people exist in a stable quantum matrix, alive, unharmed, experiencing no passage of time. They will remain in that state indefinitely, or until you make the choice to leave our space and return them to normal reality." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression carrying the weight of scientific ethics that had been tested by centuries of conflict. "Admiral, we take no pleasure in these demonstrations. Every species that approaches our system forces us to prove our capabilities. Every time, we hope desperately that it will be the last. But it never is. Why not simply broadcast your abilities to the entire galaxy?" Commander Vector interjected from behind Zythara, his compound eyes reflecting the same confusion that gripped the entire bridge crew. "If every empire understood your true power, they would unite against us," Dr. Webb interrupted, with the certainty of someone who had run countless strategic simulations. "History teaches us that when faced with an incomprehensible threat, species don't surrender, they collaborate.
A dozen major empires working together might find ways to counter our quantum defenses, or they might simply decide that Earth represents too great a danger to the galactic order and attempt to destroy our star from outside the heliopause. "We're not conquerors, Admiral," Hayes said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had explained this truth too many times. "We're not even expansionist. We have no interest in claiming other worlds, subjugating other species, or building an empire. We simply want to exist in peace within our own space. But the galaxy, it seems, is fundamentally incapable of allowing that." Zythara looked around her bridge, seeing her own shock and growing comprehension reflected in the faces of her officers. In 3 centuries of systematic conquest, they had never encountered anything remotely like this, a species that possessed the power to dominate the galaxy but chose isolation instead. "What exactly are you offering, Admiral Hayes?" "The same compact we've proposed to every empire that has found us," Hayes replied without hesitation. "Withdraw your fleet from our system. Remove Sol from your star charts. Forget that you ever discovered us. In exchange, your missing squadron will be returned to normal space at the edge of our heliopause, unharmed and with their memories of this encounter carefully edited to prevent any awkward questions. And if we refuse this generous offer?" The humans exchanged meaningful glances, and Zythara noticed that their expressions had subtly shifted from weary patience to something far more ominous. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that made every being on the bridge instinctively step backward, "your squadron experienced our defensive measures, quantum displacement into a parallel dimensional framework. As we explained, this process is completely reversible." "Define normal circumstances," Zythara demanded, though her voice had lost much of its earlier authority.
Quantum entanglement functions bidirectionally, Dr. Chen explained with clinical precision. We can transfer matter from our reality into the quantum matrix, but we can also introduce elements from the matrix into our space. Elements that originate from dimensions where the fundamental laws of physics operate differently. Hayes stood slowly, his expression grave with the weight of terrible knowledge. "Admiral, 8 centuries of quantum research have revealed that our universe exists alongside countless others. Most are similar to ours, following recognizable physical laws. But some dimensions contain entities and forces that are fundamentally incompatible with normal matter. We've only been forced to employ this capability twice in our history," Dr. Webb said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "Both times against empires that ignored multiple warnings and pressed their attacks despite clear demonstrations of our power." "Complete molecular dissolution," Dr. Vasquez added with scientific detachment that somehow made the words more terrifying. "The extra-dimensional entities we can summon don't destroy matter in any conventional sense. They simply cause it to cease existing on a quantum level. Not obliterated, erased, as if it had never been part of reality." "The Zarketh Empire possessed 12,000 warships," Hayes said quietly. "The Moltar hegemony commanded 15,000. After we released the entities from the incompatible dimensions, both civilizations had exactly 0 ships, 0 installations, 0 inhabited worlds. Their entire societies simply weren't anymore." The bridge fell silent again as the implications settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Zythara felt something she had never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: absolute, paralyzing terror. Admiral Hayes stood alone on the view screen now, the other humans having departed to attend to duties that spanned centuries of careful preparation. His tired eyes seemed to pierce through the transmission, looking directly into the deepest fears that Zythara had never acknowledged until this moment. "You have exactly 6 hours to make your decision, Admiral," he said with quiet finality. "Stay and face consequences that will extend far beyond your fleet, or leave and never return to trouble our space again. But before you choose, let me tell you the real reason we continue these demonstrations, the truth that no empire has ever been willing to hear. I thought you had already explained everything, Zythara began, but Hayes raised a weathered hand. No, Admiral. I told you our history, our capabilities, our defensive measures. Now, let me tell you about our purpose and why your choice today will determine the fate of more than just your empire. Hayes paused, his expression growing even more grave. In 800 years of contact with galactic civilization, do you know how many species have approached Earth with genuinely peaceful intentions? How many came seeking honest cultural exchange, mutual cooperation, or simple friendship? Zythara remained silent, though she suspected the answer would be devastating. 0, Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated disappointment. Every single contact, all 18 encounters, including yours, has been an attempted conquest, subjugation, or exploitation. Every species that has found us has immediately begun calculating how to claim our resources, enslave our population, or absorb our technology. Not one has ever simply said hello. So you made yourselves into something too dangerous to approach. We made ourselves into a mirror, Admiral, Hayes corrected with bitter precision. A reflection of what the galaxy truly is beneath all its pretensions of civilization and diplomacy. Do you understand what has happened to galactic politics since we began our isolation? What do you mean? Constant warfare, Hayes replied, his voice gaining intensity. Brutal, endless conflicts between major empires that consume billions of lives every decade. And do you know why these wars have intensified? Because none of the galactic powers can expand into human space. The territory that should have been ours, the neutral zone our presence creates, has become the most contested region in the galaxy. Zythara felt her mandibles click involuntarily as the implication struck her. You're saying the major empires are fighting each other because they cannot fight you? I'm saying the galaxy suffers from a terminal disease, Admiral, an addiction to dominance, to conquest, to the subjugation of anything different or weaker. And, like any addict denied their preferred substance, they turn to increasingly destructive alternatives. Hayes leaned forward, his expression intense with prophetic certainty. Every empire that leaves our system returns to wage war against their neighbors with renewed fury, seeking to claim through violence what they cannot take from us through force. What are you proposing we do differently? Nothing, Hayes said with crushing finality. I'm not proposing anything because proposals require trust, and trust requires the possibility of peaceful coexistence, and we learned centuries ago that peaceful coexistence is impossible with species that view everything in terms of conquest and submission. Then what is the point of this conversation? To tell you what will happen next, Admiral, what always happens next. Hayes smiled, but the expression carried no warmth, only the terrible satisfaction of someone whose predictions had proven accurate for 8 centuries. You will leave our system and return to your empire. You will report that Earth is too dangerous to attack, just as 17 other commanders have reported before you. Your superiors will accept this assessment and redirect their expansion efforts toward other targets. And then? Then you will wage war against your neighbors with increased desperation because the galaxy's resources are finite and every empire needs to expand to survive. The hegemony will clash with other powers seeking the same territories you cannot claim from us. Millions will die in conflicts that exist only because we refuse to be conquered. Hayes stood, his figure seeming to grow larger and more ominous despite the limitations of the transmission. Eventually, Admiral, the galaxy will exhaust itself. The endless wars will consume every empire, every species, every world capable of sustaining civilization. Ships will fall silent, weapons will cease firing, and the great powers will collapse under the weight of their own aggression. And when that happens, Zikthara whispered, though she dreaded the answer, when the last empire falls, when the final gun stops shooting, there will be only one species left with the infrastructure, the knowledge, and the untouched resources necessary to rebuild galactic civilization. Hayes' expression became unreadable. We never chose this path, Admiral. We were forced onto it by a universe that offered us only two alternatives: be conquered or become unconquerable. You could have chosen exile. And gone where? Hayes interrupted. Every galaxy within our reach contains the same aggressive species, the same imperial ambitions, the same fundamental inability to coexist peacefully with anything different. Running would merely delay the inevitable confrontation. So you chose to become the ultimate predator. We chose to become the final consequence, Hayes corrected. A permanent reminder of what happens when a galaxy mistakes wisdom for weakness, when it confuses peaceful intent with vulnerability, when it assumes that kindness equals conquest opportunity. The transmission flickered, and Hayes delivered his final words with the authority of absolute certainty. Your 6 hours begin now, Admiral. Choose wisely, because your decision will determine whether the hegemony joins the long list of empires that learned too late what it means to awaken something that should have been left sleeping. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in absolute silence.